We got breaking news and a stunning reversal for the Trump administration. The United States Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett, have sided with the Democratic wing of the Supreme Court and ruled that a federal court judge was right to order that the Trump administration turn on the spigots and pay $2 billion worth of humanitarian aid for services and products already provided, and do so under a calendar set by the federal judge. That was so shocking that even Justice Alito, joined by the four losers, the four in the minority, took a whack at the majority and said that they were stunned by the majority's decision to violate what they saw as sovereign immunity, to force the government to pay taxpayer dollars for things that were already incurred, for expenses already committed to. And therefore, he is shocked by the majority decision. I'm not shocked. I'm happy. And one of my working theories, which I'll explore on this hot take here on Legal AF, the YouTube channel, is that little fist bump between Donald Trump and John Roberts last night that John Roberts really didn't want to participate in as the Chief Justice, where he said, appreciate you, like your work, backfired, because this was obviously written by Chief Justice Roberts and telling the federal judge, you were right, don't listen to Alito. He's excoriating the federal judge, taking him to the woodshed. But in order to take a federal judge to the woodshed, Justice Alito, you need 5 to do it. And you only had 4. I'm Michael Popak. Let's get down to this breaking news on this United States Supreme Court decision and how we got here. I did earlier reporting right here on Legal AF and on the Legal AF podcast just a few days ago about the fact that I did 2 separate hot takes. One, that Judge Ali, a federal judge appointed by President Biden, a Canadian-American, by the way, hold that thought, Canadian-American, qualified as a lawyer in Canada and in the United States, worked his way up. He's in his 40s. He's a great federal judge. I'd put him on the United States Supreme Court shortlist in the future when there's a Democrat in office. Judge Ali gets everybody together, brought by USAID Coalition, a group of not-for-profit and contractors, all U.S.-based, by the way, that had all of their funding cut off overnight, $40 billion or so, because USAID was put out of business by Marco Rubio, by Donald Trump, who's really the Secretary of State in his own administration, without giving these people any chance to secure alternate financing or funding from Europe or any other places. Just, you're dying of AIDS, you're dying of cancer, you're dying of hunger, of famine, and all that. So what? It's American dollars. America first. Yippee. Federal judge said, I don't think so. That sounds arbitrary and capricious. That sounds like it's a violation of the separation of powers because Congress already delegated those funds for that purpose. And the executive branch can't cut the funding just because it wants to. And so Judge Ali granted the temporary restraining order requiring that the funds be paid. He gave the Trump administration X amount of time in order to do it. When it was apparent they weren't making any of the funding that was required by the judge after a week or 10 days went by, the judge pulled everybody together in a motion for contempt that was filed and said, what are we doing? How come the funding's not being made? I'm not trying to administer your programs. You want to find waste and fraud? That sounds admirable within these programs. And you can find on a case-by-case basis that somebody shouldn't be paid. Then that's what you should do in the executive branch. But just to cut the fuel line and the fuel supply, that I'm not going to allow. And why haven't you made the payments? And they, all sorts of, you see the Trump administration, they purposely send people in who don't know what they're talking about, who don't have the knowledge that they need at the Department of Justice on purpose. So they have plausible deniability, although that deniability is becoming increasingly less plausible. So the judge got frustrated and said, I'm going to give you a deadline, and gave a deadline of, I think, on February 26th at 1 stroke before midnight to make the $2 billion in payments. A small amount of money, given how much is at stake with the trillions of dollars in our national economy. Well, the Trump administration didn't like that, and they ran to the United States Supreme Court. And I did a new hot take about Chief Justice Roberts granting an administrative stay because he's the first judge on the train over all things DC. He can make his own decision by way of what we call the shadow docket. So he did a hybrid. He gave a administrative stay, not on the substance. He didn't rule that Judge Ali was wrong. He didn't rule that the Trump administration was wrong. He just said, I need more time. I'm going to do an administrative stay. I'm going to hold the ring until I get on Friday. This was on Tuesday. On Friday last week, the opposition to the application. I want to see the other side's argument from USAID, AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition. And then I'll turn it over to the full court. That's how we get to the 9. Well, They filed on Friday. It was a very compelling brief about the procedural history and why the Trump administration is in contempt and why the $2 billion, which is just a very small amount of the 40 or 50 billion that's out there in humanitarian aid. But this was the amount that was determined in court to be already for services and goods already performed, already created, already sold. Get these people paid, right? So, and there's American jobs behind all of that, by the way. So the Chief Justice Roberts does that, sees the briefing, turns it over to the full 9, and now we have the decision, which I'm going to read to you from. The decision is interesting. The blast that comes from Alito, along with Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Thomas, is breathtaking, stunning, to use Alito's own terms. This is what the court says. And this is now the 5-person majority. That's what you need. Got to count to 5 on the United States Supreme Court. You got Chief Justice Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, who's the swing vote. She's right of center, but she's right of center. And she's not regularly siding with the MAGA right, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. Those two joining with Ketanji Brown Jackson, Kagan, and Sotomayor. That's your 5. That gives you your order. Here's what the judge says. It says that after due regard for all of the papers and having read all of the papers, the application by the Trump administration to stop the temporary restraining order and stop the component of it to force $2 billion in payment is denied. Given that now they give direction, the 5 of them, to the federal court judge. That's a lot better than what Alito does, which is he chastises the judge, calls the judge rogue, full of hubris, full of self-aggrandizement of jurisdiction in an attempt to take Judge Ali out to the woodshed, sensing that, well, he's a young judge, he's Canadian, maybe I can beat him up. Yeah, no. So here's what the majority instructs the lower court, the Judge Ali, to do next. The district court, the applicant, given that the deadline in the challenged order has now passed. In other words, we're already a week past the midnight deadline to make the payment. Now that you have that, and you've got in front of you, lower court judge, you've got in front of you the preliminary injunction. This was all on temporary restraining order, which is the second level on the food chain of injunctions and blocks. Now that we're going to the preliminary injunction level, and you're doing all that, then the district court should clarify, that's a direction, it's like a mandate. You shall clarify what obligations the government must fulfill to ensure compliance with the temporary restraining order with due regard for the feasibility of any compliance deadlines. Let me unpack that. That means, I know a lot of the reporting is, the $2 billion must immediately be paid. Not quite. They're telling the trial judge, get everybody back together again. Do your preliminary injunction hearing. Reset your deadlines and be cognizant of how long it's going to take the federal government to sort of put the toothpaste back in the tube of their own making. Yes, it's their fault to make these payments. Don't give them like, tomorrow. We don't want to see another order where you say 3 days notice. Give them a reasonable amount of time, a reasonable runway to make these payments. And if you do that, what they're signaling is, we will support you. You have 5 votes for that. You do something else, you do another 72-hour notice thing, you may not have your 5 votes. That's the not so subtle hint by the majority. And therefore, the order originally entered, so now they got to take care of the procedure here. The vacating order, the administrative stay order is vacated, meaning it's taken off. Now, here's what Alito had to say for all that. I'm going to read you 2 paragraphs from it. You'll get the gist. This is how they framed the issue in the minority, the losing side. Does a single district court judge, Judge Ali, who likely lacks jurisdiction, have the unchecked power to compel the government of the United States to pay out and probably lose forever $2 billion taxpayer dollars? The answer to that question is an emphatic no, except the majority says yes. But a majority of this court apparently thinks otherwise. I am stunned. Let me unpack that for a minute. First of all, he starts from a premise that I think is false and faulty, which is that the district court judge lacks jurisdiction. He's arguing that there's some sort of sovereign immunity. There's some sort of executive branch immunity or sovereign immunity over payments. What we really have here is an illegal, unconstitutional attempt to impound congressionally mandated funds, which violates the Constitution and the separation of powers. And also, is it a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act? Nothing is more arbitrary and capricious than just cutting the fuel line for humanitarian aid around the world without even allowing it to sundown, giving these people time to transition without a finding of fraud in the whole process. So the the straw man way he's framed it leads him to his stunned conclusion. Yeah. He then says towards the end, kind of a matching bookends here. That was at the beginning. At the end, on page 8 over to 9, Alito says on behalf of the minority, today the court makes a most unfortunate misstep that rewards an act of judicial hubris and imposes a $2 billion penalty on American taxpayers. See, I'm all for paying contractors that are owed money. I know Donald Trump has left a trail of broken hearts and tears by contractors that he screwed in his private business world. But we're Americans and we're supposed to pay our debts and pay our contracts. Alito continues, the district court has made plain its frustration with the government. So now he's saying the judge is just annoyed. And respondents raised serious concerns about non-payment for completed work. But the relief ordered is quite simply too extreme a response. A federal court has many tools to administer a party's supposed nonfeasance, self-aggrandizement of jurisdiction. You took too much jurisdiction for yourself, Judge, is not one of them. I would chart a different path than the court does today, so I must respectfully dissent. It started out with, I'm shocked, and it kind of went into like, meh, at the end. What does it mean? It means that in the future, we know there's a voting block here that we've talked about at length on Legal AF and on Unprecedented of 4, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas, who are going to consistently in lockstep vote for Donald Trump's self-aggrandizement of power, his power grab, to try to elevate and inflate the Article 2 president above all the other allegedly co-equal branches of government, including the court, because many of them worked in the presidential wing in the executive branch and are supportive of it. When it comes to funding, though, at least for now, we're not on federal workers yet. We're not on firing independent watchdogs yet, but on funding, it looks like on a case-by-case basis, we might be able to drag Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett over to the Democratic wing of the Supreme Court and end up 5-4 in the right way, depending upon how the issues are framed and all of that. I also don't think it helped that during the joint session of Congress, that Donald Trump decided as he passed Chief Justice Roberts, who looked very squeamish in being there, and basically gave him a fist bump and a hug and said, yeah, appreciate you. I don't think that helped. The more, and I know people that know Roberts, well, maybe 1 degree of separation. Roberts is already upset that people are upset with him about the immunity decision because he thinks he did everything right. But he's also worried about his own legacy and will side with those other 4 regularly on issues that are important to him. You know, like federalism and allowing raw sewage apparently to be dumped into our water supply in a recent Supreme Court decision. And now we have him trying to, anytime you push him to look like he's favoring Donald Trump now, I think it could backfire. I think that's maybe what we've seen just now. We'll continue to follow it all right here on Legal AF. Take a minute. We're so close to 500,000 subscribers in less than 6 months. It is a miracle. I'm stunned. Continue to help us build. I think we'll hit it in the next 3 days. Maybe you'll help us turn over the odometer, 500,000 subscribers. I'm Michael Popak in the interim. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.